The Dragon at the Well by Teresa Bateman. Prince Peter rode through the forest, cursing the heat and the tangled pathways that led nowhere. He'd been lost for days, and it seemed as though all the gold coins in his pouch could buy neither a drink of water nor directions home. "It's your fault," he muttered angrily to his horse, but the tired animal only sighed and plodded on. Suddenly, a walled fortress appeared through the trees, its gates open. Peter rode into the silent courtyard and dismounted at the well. As he raised a brimming ladle of water to his lips, he was startled to see an owl launch itself from the wall. What was an owl doing out in daylight? Peter's eyes followed the bird's flight to where an even bigger surprise waited: a dragon. "Drink, and you must pay the price," said the dragon. "Price?" Peter quickly regained his composure and flung his belt pouch at the dragon's feet. "I am the Prince Peter. I can pay any sum you name." Again, he raised the dipper to his lips. "Gold is not the price," said the dragon. "Then what?" asked Peter impatiently. The dragon smiled. "I ask for your firstborn daughter." "Is that all?" laughed the prince, stooping to retrieve his gold. "You ask little enough. Consider the bargain struck." He drank deeply from the well, emptying the dipper twice before allowing his weary horse to drink. When Peter turned to ask directions, the dragon was gone. He noticed, though, that a road wound through the forest beyond the fortress gates. Wondering how he had missed it, the prince mounted his horse and followed the wide, smooth track back to his castle. Once safe at home, he soon forgot all about the bargain he had made. Years passed. Peter became king, married, and rejoiced at the birth of 2 sons. Then a daughter was born, and his heart sank. He gazed into the baby's eyes, so like his queen's, and remembered everything. Desperate, he devised a plan to save his daughter from the dragon. The king and queen named their child Prince Marin and raised her as a boy. She learned archery, swordplay, and dragon lore. She swam in the moat and became skillful at chess. Her mother made only one demand, that Marin not cut her hair. "A princess's hair is her crowning glory," the queen insisted. "Let's not forsake her heritage entirely." And so it was that Marin's hair was braided tightly and covered with a cap. 16 years went by. The princess's laughter filled the castle, and after the queen died, Marin was the only one who could make her father smile. One hot summer day, Marin was shooting arrows in a high-walled courtyard. Sweat trickled down her nose. Alone, except for a small brown owl, she removed her cap and let down her braids. Her father would have disapproved, but he need never know, unless owls could talk. What was an owl doing out in daylight anyway? A flurry of wings launched the bird into the air. Startled, Marin watched as it seemed to shimmer and disappear. "Must be the sun," she murmured, returning the cap to her head, but the harm was already done. Suddenly, the air was battered by great wings. Marin's hat flew off again as a jeweled talon plucked her from the ground. Her father was watching from a palace window, but he could do nothing. Within seconds, the dragon was high in the air and shimmering out of sight. At first, Marin beat at the clawed foot with her bow, but it was futile, and soon they were circling down toward a fortress surrounded by trees. As they landed in the courtyard, an owl settled on an open window. Released Marin, spun around. "I'm Startler," said the dragon. "Welcome to your new home." Marin looked around her. Stone walls rose tall and forbidding. "Why am I here?" she asked. Starler eyed her speculatively. Your father long ago promised his firstborn daughter for a drink from my well. It's a price he seemed willing to pay at the time, but I see he's tried to cheat me. So I must pay the price for my father's foolishness? She asked. Starler motioned her inside. Come eat, then I'll tell you the price of your freedom. Pay it or serve me the rest of your days. Seeing no choice, Marin obeyed, but she couldn't help saying, You'll be disappointed in my housekeeping, and if you think to eat me, I suspect I'll sit ill on even your ironclad stomach. Starler laughed as a well-laden table appeared. I don't lack for food, he remarked. The owl Marin had seen in the courtyard swooped down, snatching a piece of meat off the table. Did I introduce you to Whirlwind? The dragon remarked, shooing the bird away with a wingtip. He's been my only companion since, well, for many years. It seems most creatures fear dragons, and my lot would have been lonely without him. I send him where I will, and he brings me news of the outside world. Still, he could improve his manners. Marin smiled as Whirlwind landed on the dragon's wing to eat. The owl's trusted nature made Starler seem less threatening. Even so, the dragon's next words were daunting. You may serve me, Starler said, or win your freedom. Every midnight I have a visitor. A cocky lad who's never been bested by any man. Defeat him in 3 contests and you will be free. Marin considered. What kind of contests? Chess the first night to test your strategy, then swordplay the next night. If you survive, you will be allowed to choose the final contest. It seemed she had little choice. Marin agreed to the tests. That night, as the clock struck 12, a knock came at her door. She took a deep breath and swung it open, unprepared for the charming young man who stood before her. My lady, he murmured, startling green eyes looking into hers. Under one arm was a chessboard. Call me Marin, and what may I call you? Thomas, the undefeatable. Marin raised an eyebrow. Indeed? I'll just call you Tom. Tom put the board on the table, spilling the chess pieces out. Marin quickly chose white, looking for any advantage she could gain. Tom raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as he set up his dark pieces. His confidence was unnerving. Marin played well, but for each move Tom had a counter move. After trying familiar gambits and finding them thwarted, Marin cautiously attempted new moves. She would not allow herself to be pushed into indiscretion. Tom kept up a lively banter, but it faltered as the game wore on. Marin yawned, then blinked. Tom had nudged his king with a thumb, surreptitiously moving it a square. She glared, and he nudged it back. Marin was heartened. If he was trying to cheat, he must feel threatened. She moved her queen, creating an opening for him to attack an apparent weakness. Dawn was near when Tom fell into Marin's trap. She moved her knight. Checkmate! He looked shocked. Well played, my lady, but can you handle a sword as well? He bowed, then was gone. Wait! Marin shouted, running after him, but the corridor was empty. The evening after besting Tom at chess, Marin dined with Starler. She was surprised to find herself laughing more than once at his dry wit. Starler's stories about griffins and dragons were so delightful that she was almost sorry to see the evening end. As midnight neared, Marin returned to her room to find a sword on her pillow. She swung the weapon, delighted in its balance, but she was sobered by the thought of the contest ahead. When the expected knock came, Marin flung the door open and saw her opponent of the previous night. Now he wore an elaborate suit of armor, but no helmet. He smiled, his eyes filled with anticipation. and dread. Merrin had no time to ponder this as she thrust forward to join the battle. She quickly established a pattern, and Tom followed it. Thrust, backstep, left thrust up, right, side swipe left. She led her opponent down the hall in a deadly dance. Merrin found her training tested to its limits and began to tire. She stepped onto a rug, leading her opponent across it. Thrust, backstep. Tom pressed forward as she faltered. She stepped onto the stone floor again, and her sword dipped in apparent defeat. Tom lunged just as she snagged the rug with the point of her blade and flung it up to catch his sword, bringing it crashing out of his hand. He stared in astonishment, then bowed. "You have won again, my lady." "Tomorrow the choice is mine," Merrin snapped. "Bring a bow and arrows. We'll see if your archery is better than your swordsmanship." Tom gave her a strange grin, mixed delight and defeat, and ran down the corridor out of sight. Merrin sank to the cold stone floor and leaned her forehead against her knees. One more night and she would be free. The next evening, as she and Starler dined, Merrin realized how much she enjoyed debating with the dragon. Their viewpoints often varied, but conversations were never dull. Besides, there was something in the dragon's gaze that tugged at her heart. Merrin quickly put that thought away, not wishing to analyze it further. As the meal drew to an end, Starler rose from the table. "Tonight is the final test," he said. "If you win, you will be free." "I'll win," Merrin said firmly. "Then I wish you luck," said Starler. "I must go now. Tonight will be busy, and tomorrow—" There was an awkward pause, and then he was gone. Merrin went out to the courtyard to prepare for the archery contest. Curious, she tried the outer gate. It opened at her touch. Freedom was a footstep away, but what of honor? She turned back to the courtyard. The full moon provided light, while the abandoned stables supplied moldy hay bales, grain sacks, and paint. Merrin drew targets on the sacks, draped them over the hay, and hauled the bales out into the courtyard. Mice, disturbed from their peaceful homes, ran over her toes. "Sorry," Merrin grunted, "but this hay will soon prove very inhospitable." She turned to find Tom watching her. Leaning against the well beside him were 2 bows and a quiver of arrows. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I suppose I'm as ready as I'll ever be," she replied. The contest began, and Merrin was dismayed to find they were evenly matched. Their arrows landed so near each other that it seemed neither would win. As the full moon slid westward, the 2 opponents stopped to catch their breath. Merrin noticed a mouse poking its nose out of one of the hay bales. Foolish thing not to have gone when it had the opportunity. Perhaps she had been foolish too. "It's nearly dawn," Tom announced. "You haven't won, therefore you've lost." Just then, Merrin saw a movement on a window casement. "See that owl?" she asked. "Whoever can bring him down will win." I can't shoot Whirlwind," Tom said. "Are you conceding the contest?" Merrin asked quickly. Reluctantly, Tom raised his bow and took aim, but at the last moment, his arrow flew wide. He watched uneasily as Merrin placed an arrow on her bowstring and aimed at the owl. He started to speak, but she shook her head. "My freedom is at stake." "And mine," Tom said, enigmatically. She pulled the bow taut, then suddenly dipped it. The arrow hit the stones at the heels of the mouse poking around the targets, startling. It ran. Whirlwind saw it and swooped low over the courtyard, touching down briefly as he caught his prey and rose to the window again. Triumphant, Merrin turned to her opponent. "I brought the owl down just as we agreed. I've won." Tom, was leaning against a wall, relieved. I actually thought you were going to kill him. I should have known better. Marin frowned. Do you admit defeat? I stand fairly defeated, he said. There was a ringing of bells. The moon slid behind the trees as the sun turned the sky pink gold. Marin watched, fascinated, as the empty courtyard suddenly came to life. Vines wound their way up the walls, and horses stamped in the stables. People laughed inside the fortress. Outside, the ancient forest seemed to step back as the gate swung open. Confused, Marin turned to Tom. He was smiling, a strangely familiar smile. You did it, he said, swinging Marin off her feet. You've broken the enchantment. What enchantment? She asked. And where's Starler? Tom flushed, then after a moment and said softly, I am Starler, and before that I was a cocky young prince who refused to help an old man in need. When he threatened me with disaster, I declared, I can be bested by no man. Tom avoided Marin's eyes. He cursed me and the fortress. I could only walk as a man from midnight to dawn. During that time, if I could be fairly beaten in 3 contests of wit or skill, the curse would be lifted. But my own words were used against me, and I could be defeated by no man. And when you were a dragon? Marin asked. Tom gave a wry smile. The dragon could grow in wisdom and did. The man stayed much the same, certain of his own abilities, and unwilling to admit defeat. It was your father who gave me hope, Tom continued. In him, I saw my own faults. He was untrustworthy, proud, overconfident. I suspected he would break his promise and raise his daughter as a prince. It's what I would have done, and while it's true I could be defeated by no man, you are not a man. His gaze made her blush. Looking into his eyes, Marin could see the same quiet wisdom that she had grown to love in Starler. Now, Tom said, you've won your freedom, but I've lost my heart. Will you stay as my wife? Marin nodded. I will, if only to improve your chess game. The wedding was planned, and Marin sent an invitation to her father with no mention of the bride's name. His sons urged King Peter to accept, hoping to break the sorrow that had held him in its sway since the death of his queen and Marin's capture. A carriage came to take him to the wedding. On arrival, King Peter didn't recognize the fortress he'd visited so many years ago. Nor did he recognize the bride. Resplendent in a flowing gown and veil, her long hair cascading over her shoulders. He stepped out of the carriage, tired and thirsty. The bride herself hurried to his side with a dipper. What would you give to quench your thirst? She asked. I would go thirsty the rest of my days, he choked out, if I could but undo the bargain I struck so long ago. Marin smiled, although tears filled her own eyes. Father, she said, lifting her veil. Unbelieving, he looked up into blue eyes so like those of his late queen. Marin placed a hand on his shoulder. Drink, father, she urged. The price has been paid.